The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. My name is Paul Hender. I'm the Head of Insights and Analysis at Gorkana, and welcome to the second webinar in a three-part series on media analysis. Now, for those that saw my last session, there was a running nautical theme. If there was a theme this time round, it's probably health. Now, to tee this up, I would like to run a quick poll. So we're just going to get this up now. The question is, which of the following health conditions causes the most worldwide deaths and incapacity? And by incapacity, I mean it's preventing people from running their normal lives. And we're starting to get some answers through now. And it seems to be between heart disease and malaria, which is very interesting. So we'll let that carry on for a second. Don't forget, you can also send your questions through to us using the webinar question box, and we'll have answer some questions at the end. You can also get through to us via our Twitter channel, which is #GorkanaAnalysis. If you missed the first session, don't worry, we have now published it on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Gorkana Group. If you search for the Analytics series, you should see it. So in my first session, we discussed why communications industry is seeing a huge rise in demand for insight and analysis services. Increased media fragmentation and the rise of social media has meant that managing reputations and controlling messages in the media has become much harder. It's become much harder because there's so much more of it. It has become impractical to make sense of the media in the way that we used to do it, by collecting and reading press cuttings. There's just too much. You can't see the wood for the trees. It's a bit like playing a game of Where's Wally. Now, I haven't played Where's Wally in a webinar before, but we'll give it a go. Can you find him? Let me give you a help. There he is. Where there's too much information, we need signposts to tell us what's important, what we should focus on, who is influential to my audience, and what are they saying. We need to know how that audience is reacting and how they are acting. And above all, we need to know what we can do about it. So last time, we focused on the why and the how. Why you should analyze and how to approach the building blocks of the measurement program. Today, I want to look at the what. What is it we should be measuring? So last time we saw some dramatic headlines relating to the horse meat scandal, fixing lending rates and flooding. But one of the more interesting front pages from the last few months was this one in the Metro. Meet Anita Albrecht. Anita is a bodybuilder. She went for a health checkup and was told by the nurse that she was obese and needed to go on a calorie-controlled diet where she was to eat less than 1,000 calories a day. Now, given Anita's high metabolism, this has actually been pretty dangerous, so something's clearly gone wrong. Well, obesity is defined as when your BMI, or your body mass index, is greater than 30. And it's calculated as your mass in kilograms divided by your height squared. Now, Anita was quite short. She was 4'11", and she was 10 stone. And that gave her a BMI of 30. So technically, she was obese, but she was not unhealthy. BMI is a crude metric because it doesn't take into account body composition. If you have a high muscle mass, you're quite likely to be obese. So most professional rugby players and American footballers are obese. So does this mean BMI is wrong? Well, no. It's a simple metric, and it works for the majority of people. But it doesn't work for everyone. And it didn't work for Anita. It wasn't measuring what matters to her. For years, the analysis community was looking for the silver bullet, the one metric that would measure the effectiveness of communication and finally act as a replacement for the advertising value equivalent. In 2010, at the Amex Summit in Barcelona, a set of 7 core principles were agreed. Importantly, along with a consensus that that silver bullet did not exist. And the reason was that measurement, to be useful, needs to be done in the context of what you're trying to achieve in the first place. The first principle proposes the importance of goal setting and measurement. So in order to decide what you're first going to measure, you actually need to understand what your goals are. To frame this, let's look at some communications theory. For much of the last 50 years, communications was dominated by the advertiser model. We decide on our messages, we buy the advertising space, we put what we want in it, we interrupt our audience from what they're doing, we force feed them what we want them to hear. But PR acted differently. Here, we're reliant on a third party, a journalist, to write good things about us. So we feed them press releases and they hope they pick this up in their articles. And if they did, then life was great, because an independent, authoritative person had said good things, and our audience was much more likely to believe it. 3 times more likely to believe it, according to the non-existent research that prompted numerous PR agencies to multiply the advertising equivalent value by 3 in order to calculate PR value. And we can think of this as inputs, which is the activity itself, outputs, what appears in the media, and outcomes, which is the effect on the audience. But this linear model has changed. Digitization has made it easier to publish, which has increased the competition. But that has reduced what people were preparing to pay for the content, often down to the bargain basement price of free. And that meant fewer journalists. But at the same time, the number of channels has increased, which meant that our increasingly harassed journalist was having to contribute more and more content. In his book, Flat Earth News, journalist Nick Davis estimates that the average journalist has gone from writing 1 story a day to 10 stories a day. You can't write 10 stories a day, well, not properly, and so journalists needing access to interesting content in order to feed the space. Research from Cardiff University School of Journalism has shown that 80% of content in home news sections of newspapers comes from news wires and PR sources rather than originating from journalists. So agencies are reinventing themselves as content creators. People like kittens on the internet, so let's give them kittens. Carrying on my nautical theme from last week, here's Pirate Kitten. The journalist is happy because it fills the channels. But digitization has meant that now our audience can answer back through social media channels. I don't even like cats, but how can you dislike this? I think my ovaries just cried a little. And before you know it, you have a community. And that community can fill the space left by our dwindling journalists by becoming increasingly influential generators of content in their own right. But how do we go about measuring this stuff? Well, luckily, AMEC has developed the Valid Metrics framework to help with this. Now, the framework takes this idea of inputs, outputs, and outcomes, and it overlays them with the marketing funnel. The marketing funnel shows the stages that a person would go through on their journey toward an action. So to put this into life, let's say we launch a product, and keep it easy, that's something we can all contemplate, the new iPad. First, is the audience aware that there is a new iPad? And if they are, what do they know about it? Are there ways, for example, that it has a better battery life or a higher resolution screen? Are they actively considering it? Maybe they're comparing the iPad in relation to the Google Nexus. If they're considering it, do they then feel a preference? I've now decided I prefer the iPad to the Google Nexus. And finally, have they walked into the Apple store with their credit card? In the Valid Metrics framework, there are officially 5 stages of the marketing funnel, which are awareness, knowledge, consideration, preference, and action. But I've deliberately simplified this to 3 so I can show how the metrics can fit in. Media analysis has traditionally been focused on output metrics, so what is being said in the media. There are many options appropriate for the different stages, and I'll give you a few here. So we can have simple volume of coverage, counting of clips. We can take that through to measuring audience penetration, including metrics like opportunities to see and reach and frequency, and I'll cover this later on. Delivery of key messages, impact measures such as the use of images or mentions in a headline, or prominence, which is how much of a share of the article did our brand get. And this is important for companies like Samsung. Now, Samsung get in lots of articles. They tend to have to share the space with Apple, who with iPad and iPhones and other brands have become the Hoover of consumer electronics. It's the default option. Moving on to consideration and preference, we're likely to include measures of favorability and sentiment and break this down by key issues or product attributes. In some cases, we might want to go into more detail, for example, on, say, product reviews. Again, this is popular for consumer products. Panasonic, for example, featured our research on product reviews in their advertising as a demonstration of third-party endorsement. Finally, is there a call to action, such as encouraging people to visit a website or calling a phone line? Well, that's what's being said in the coverage, but is it having an effect on the audience? And that leads us on to outcomes. So there have been big advances in big data recently, and certainly a cultural shift in big data. Now that's allowing us to integrate data sources from mainstream media, social media, market research, maybe other marketing channels, website analytics, and customer and sales data, so that we show the linkages from output to outcomes all the way along this chain, from awareness through to social media engagement, from important KPIs such as Net Promoter Score, through to end actions. And end actions could, of course, include lead generation, sales, market share, people going to our Apple store, and even share price. And this doesn't just have to work in a commercial context. Non-commercial examples could be, if you're the Department of Health, the number of people who quit smoking, or the number of people who eat 5 portions of fruit and vegetable a day. Or if you're RAP and you're concerned around waste, maybe the reduction in the amount of food thrown away by households. Now, I'm only showing a handful of metrics here to illustrate, but there's clearly loads more. For example, here I've listed 24 of the more common metrics that we would use, from all the way from output metrics, measuring the content, through to measuring the channels we're appearing in, the audiences we're reaching, social media engagement, market research, and end outcomes. But the challenge is that each of these metrics can theoretically be measured against each other. So each one of these 24 can be measured against another 24. So that gives us more than 600 different options, 600 different ways of looking at the data. So the problem here is that there's so much we can measure that it stops being helpful. We're back to the Where's Wally problem. US statistician and political commentator Nate Silver has said, we're not much smarter than we used to be, even though we have much more information. So that means the real skill now is in learning to pick out the useful information from all this noise. So how do we identify what is important? How do we identify what matters? Well, when we're talking to a client about what to measure, we actually usually turn this on its head by asking what the organization is trying to do in the first place. So this goes back to this point around that first principle, about tying it back to goals. So what is your overall mission and purpose? From that, we need to understand the strategic objectives. What tangible results are you trying to achieve? This then cascades down into understanding the communications objectives. And once you've done this, the eventual metrics become pretty easy to identify. The question mark goes away. To illustrate this, let's go back to the poll we just ran. So the two leading health challenges were, I think it was malaria and heart disease. And when we run these kinds of things, people are likely to mention heart disease, cancer, HIV, malaria, and so on. People are unlikely to mention stroke. And yet there are some startling statistics to show what a big health problem it is. For example, there's a stroke every 3 minutes, 27 seconds in the UK, which means that by the time that we've been on air here, there's probably been 3 people that have suffered a stroke. I'm really hoping that hasn't been in response to listening to this webinar, but it's a stark statistic. Stroke killed 3 times as many women as breast cancer and twice as many men as testicular and prostate cancer. And the stat I'm really taken aback by is that stroke is the single largest cause of death in the world, sorry, the second single largest cause of death in the world, but the largest cause of complex disability in the world. Apparently, of every 10 deaths, 1 comes from stroke. 1 in every 10 deaths. So it's a big, big health problem. The Stroke Association is the major stroke charity in the UK, and the charity lives by its mission to prevent strokes and achieve life after stroke through providing services, campaigning, education, and research. Anil Ranchod is the charity's Assistant Director of External Affairs. Here he is here. It was his brainchild to support the charity's vision through Action on Stroke Month. This is an annual campaign to raise awareness of stroke and to engage and build a community of volunteers that many stroke victims and their families depend on. Many of these volunteers are stroke victims themselves or are friends and family of people who have suffered a stroke. Now, the recent squeeze on public sector budgets has put added pressure on the charity and reinforced how important this network has become. So when it came to analysing the Stroke Association's second year of Action on Stroke Month, We worked through the communications cascade that I've just shown you in order to link the KPIs to the strategic objectives of the campaign. So we started with the overall mission and purpose, to prevent strokes and achieve life after stroke through providing services, campaigning, education and research. This drives 3 strategic objectives, which are raise awareness of stroke and the role of stroke association, grow and engage with the stroke community, and encourage people to contact stroke association, particularly those individuals that have experienced stroke for the first time, who may feel no support at all. These strategic objectives can be measured through social media engagement, such as Facebook and Twitter. Facebook likes Twitter hits to the Stroke Association website, helpline call statistics, and campaigners recruited. And this in turn leads into the communications objectives, which included launching the 3rd phase of life after stroke, with the emphasis on the emotional impact of stroke in order to raise awareness, to promote the Stroke Association's range of support services to stroke survivors, and finally build engagement with new and previous stroke survivors, which links into that point around people that have experienced stroke for the first time. The KPIs that come from these objectives include delivery of key messages, reach the campaign's target audiences, calls to action, how much of the coverage is proactively generated, and use of key spokespeople and celebrities such as Karen Brady, Kirk Douglas, Vera Lynn, and Jules Oliver. So how did we do on these KPIs? Well, the vast majority of the coverage was favourable, as we can see here. All coverage was slightly or strongly favourable. Most of the coverage was proactively generated, and spokespeople were a strong driver of that positive content. Almost half of the strongly favourable coverage featured a spokesperson. The chief executive, John Barrack, was the most prominently featured. 85% of the coverage was a lead item or a significant mention, so it had a high prominence. And a significant amount of the coverage featured a call to action, such as a mention of the website or the helpline number. And finally, message delivery was strong. 72% of coverage featured a key message, with the emotional impact of strong being particularly strongly conveyed, which we can link back to those strategic objectives. Now, as an aside here, on message delivery, one question we're commonly asked is there an ideal number of messages? I think this is a good question. And to answer this, we looked at more than 200 of our customers to see if there's a link between the number of messages and the effectiveness of delivery. While we were expecting the relationship, we were surprised to see how strong it was. Clients with 6 or fewer messages were more than twice as likely to deliver those messages as those with more. Clients with 3 or less were more than 3 times as likely to deliver those messages. So if you excuse the pun, the message is clear, less is more. Why? Well, in this age of media proliferation, people are bombarded with messages the whole time. You need to be able to cut through, which is why most successful brands have very clear brand identities. We mentioned Apple earlier on, but when you think of Apple, you tend to think of good design. If you think of Rolex, you think of luxury. And at the other end, you think of Lidl, you think value. But this isn't such a bad thing. Lidl are performing very well at the moment. And at the expense of Tesco, who after a run of poor results had to let go their chief executive, Philip Clark, after being there for more than 40 years earlier this week. The consensus among retail analysts is that Tesco's have lost their brand identity. They've lost customers to Waitrose and Marks & Spencer's at the top end of the market, and Aldi and Lidl at the lower end. If people don't know what you stand for, it affects business. So communication is about saying the right thing to the right audience. So far, we've looked at the content of the coverage, which is basically saying, is it saying the right thing? So now we need to understand whether we have reached the right audience. Now, this can cause challenges. I was recently talking to some people from a PR agency, and no, it wasn't the perfect curve from BBC mockumentary W1A, but this agency had spent a lot of effort promoting the success of their work that they had done for their clients. For example, this quote was from some of their promotional literature. The campaign reached 187 million consumers and achieved an 8-to-1 return on investment. Now, we'll come back to the return on investment number in the next session when we're going to focus on ROI. But let's take that 187 million. How many adults are there in the UK? Well, there's 50 million. So 187 million seems impossible. So again, something's gone wrong. The problem here is that the 187 million is not actually reach at all. It's something called opportunities to see, but it's been misinterpreted as reach. And that one bit of confusion could, of course, lead to an instant lack of credibility. When we lose credibility, we're less likely to be taken seriously at the marketing table, and we're more likely to have mockumentaries make fun of us. To explore this a bit further, opportunities to see is simply adding up the readership of each article. But this can count individuals several times. Let me give you an example. Here we have 6 people. Of those 6 people, The Guardian is read by 3. The BBC's news website is read by 4, and finally the London Evening Standard is read by 2. If we added those together, the 3 plus the 4 plus the 2, we get 9. But we've only reached 6 people. And that's because some people were reached more than once. Now, the only way you can get a unique reach is to use some form of single source research. We, for example, use an omnibus survey of 10,000 people from YouGov. And this research asks a representative sample of the population about their media consumption habits, which can then be cross-tabulated with demographic and lifestyle breakdowns. And this can give us some really powerful information. If we go back to the Stroke Association, we generated 508 million opportunities to see, but as we've seen, that doesn't really mean a lot. But by linking it to this research, it can tell us that the 508 million opportunities to see is actually 78% of the adult population who have been reached 8.4 times over the course of the campaign. Now that frequency is important because market research has shown that repeat exposures are important to improve the likelihood of retaining information. And there's a consensus that 3 or more exposures is needed to be effective. But were Action on Stroke Month interested in just all adults? Well, no, because they were interested in targeting key audiences such as people who are at risk of stroke or those who have been affected by stroke. And if we look across those audiences, we can see that campaigns successfully reach more than 3/4 of each of those 7 target audiences, with one exception. And that's BMEs, or black and minority ethnic groups. This is a hugely important finding. If you're black, you're more than twice as likely to suffer a stroke than if you're white. So this is a key target audience. We were able to feed this into the planning of this year's campaign to improve the targeting of this important audience. So now we know that we're saying the right thing. We know if we're reaching the right audiences. But so what? Do we know if we're having an effect on those audiences, and are we driving them to action? Well, with the Stroke Association, we were able to track mainstream coverage against social media coverage to track the level of engagement. And furthermore, we could see if it was driving visits to the Stroke Association website. And we can get some more useful information as well. Over the course of the month, they were 850 new Facebook followers, 3,700 new Twitter followers, more than 120,000 website hits, which was a record for the website. There were more than 2,000 calls to the stroke helpline. We were able to tie the website and helpline data back to the website and helpline calls to action that we mentioned earlier. And finally, and most importantly, there were 1,000 new campaigners recruited. So all of this adds up. It gives us strong evidence to show that we'd achieved the stated objectives, 1 of raising awareness, but 2 of building and engaging this important stroke community. We were delighted when the Stroke Awareness Month received recognition at last month's AMIC Awards in their not-for-profit category as an example of best practice measurement. The judges recognized how the calls to action led to tangible results, how the use of market research enabled measurement of key target audiences, and importantly, how the measurement of KPIs, were derived directly from the campaign's strategic objectives. So I've given you a flavor here of measuring both outputs and outcomes, and thus showing how you can link earned media metrics back to strategic objectives. Next week, we'll be exploring this in more detail as we seek to answer the growing challenge of demonstrating return on investment. And finally, can we find a way to wean the industry off of advertising value equivalence? So we're now going to move on to looking at some of your questions. I've got a couple here already. So the first one, this is a good one. So when evaluating social media, how do you decide who are the key opinion formers, or the key influencers, sorry? Is it simply follow account? Well, the short answer is no. Of course, follow count can be one metric, but it's one of many that you can use. There are many ways of approaching this, and I'm actually going to chicken out of answering this question because I think we've run a parallel series of webinars specifically on social media, and my colleague Alistair Wheat, in his third webinar session, did the whole of that webinar was based on understanding key influencers. So I'd recommend you go to youtube.com/Gorkana Group and search out the Social Insights series. And you're looking for part 3, which is on influencers. I've got another question. How do you recommend evaluating online coverage, for example, the Mail Online, which has vast unique users? Yeah, this is similar to the last question. It's not an easy one to answer. It's quite a nuance in answering it. I mean, take the Mail Online as an example. It's got, as you say, it's got a vast number of users, but of course many are just interested in celebrity news. The question is how many are interested in and have actually seen the article that may have appeared on the Mail Online. There are a number of ways of approaching this. In fact, there are a number of different currencies that you can use, and there are a number of different organizations that offer reach data from Nielsen, Alexa, ComScore, or ABC. Now, they all use different methodologies. And if you look on the internet, there's a whole myriad of blog posts criticizing the different methodologies, saying one's better than the other, and so on. There's no real consensus in what's right or wrong. I think what's important is to be consistent. So choose your supplier, choose how frequently you're going to be measuring it. So, for example, do you take daily users or monthly users? You might need to be careful about national boundaries. The Guardian Online, for example, has more readers outside the UK than in the UK. So are you measuring all people that see the website or just ones within the region? The other difficult point, I think, for online media is that with print media, you can make a valid assumption that everyone that reads the newspaper reads every article. Of course, an online website, some articles are much more widely read than others. Unfortunately, the data on which articles are more widely read is not widely and publicly available. So you're a bit stuck. Now, one way of approaching that is to look at social media engagement. So, for example, you can see the number of retweets of a particular article on Twitter. I would say just be careful of big audience numbers that are used separately on their own. They don't necessarily mean a lot. What's important is not a big audience, it's making sure you've got the right audience and making sure that they're engaged. What are the challenges preventing PR measurement and metrics from improving? I think this probably links back to the first webinar when we ran a poll on what prevents people from taking analysis. And I think the answer to that is that it's an education one. So I think the more we do things like this, so webinars, the more we discuss best practice, the more we share best practice, the more AMEC is involved in education, the more that best practice is shown through things like the AMEC Awards, the more of a consensus there is around what is best practice, and then people can copy that. Okay, good question here. How do you convince your board of your success when they're used to using AVEs for measuring success, especially with limited budgets? That's a good one, and I think the answer, again, there's a kind of a nuanced answer to that. It's very difficult if your senior management are bought into AVEs. It's easier, and sometimes you can get in difficulty if you're providing the AV and suddenly the senior management, and often senior management can change, where someone comes in, particularly with a marketing background, looks at an advertising value equivalent and says, well, these are discredited, aren't they, and you're using them. So there's a problem there. I think, again, going back to my answer to the previous question, it's about education. So as long as there is a consensus in the industry that AVs are not the value of PR, which of course is one of the 7 Barcelona Principles, then that will help to convince people that you're using an AV. Of course, the problem is, what is an alternative? And if I can now plug my third webinar, that's really going to be the focus on there. So how to measure return on investment without resorting to advertising value equivalence. Technical question, I like these. What is the difference between OTS and circulation? Well, officially, OTS is adding up the readership of every article, not the circulation. So the circulation is the number of copies of a newspaper sold. The readership is the number of people that actually read it. And readership tends to be bigger than circulation. For example, if you go to a dentist's waiting room, you might find that one copy is read by many people. I'm just thinking in terms of our own industry, the PR industry. PR Week, for example, is often bought by one agency and read by several people. So you've got one copy, but you've got multiple people. So OTS should be the number that should be overall readership. And the final technical question, linking to the reach as well, and I think we'll end after this one, is how do you work out how many times you reach the same user? So this is a very good question, and it comes back to this understanding the reach and the frequency. So if you have access to single source research, so if you can know how many unique users you've reached using market research, and you know your OTS, then you can work out your frequency, because the definition of OTS, or one of the definitions of OTS, is reach times frequency. So if you know your OTS, you know your reach, divide OTS by reach, and you have the frequency. Great. Okay. Loads of questions. We've got loads more coming through, but we've run out of time. I might come back to some of those questions in my third webinar, which I'd recommend. That's in 2 weeks' time. I'd look forward to seeing you then. Hope you've enjoyed this one. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.